Game na.
Mag-mute na kayo. So, we are Group 6 and our topic is all about Alfred McCoy and Alejandro Roses, as well as political caricatures of the American era. It covers the editorial cartoons, Commission on Independence, Filipino grievances against Governor Wood, and petition letter. Shall we start with Alea May Altona?
Alfred L. William McCoy he is an American historian and educator born on June 8, 1945 in Concord. McCoy is currently the Fred Harvey Harrington Professor of History at the University of Wisconsin. Madison. He specializes in the history of the Philippines, foreign policy of the United States, European colonization of Southeast Asia, illegal drug trade, and Central Intelligence Agency covert operations. He is the author of numerous books and articles, including The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia and Closer Than Brothers. McCoy has spent the past 30 years writing about Southeast Asian history and politics. His publications include Philippine Cartoons on 1985, Anarchy of Families on 1994, Closer Than Brothers, Manhood at the Philippine Military Academy on 2000, and Lives at the Margin on 2001. After aiming a Doctor of Philosophy in Southeast Asian history at Yale, the writing of McCoy on this region has focused on two topics: Philippine political history and global opium trafficking. The Philippines remain the major focus of his research. His teaching interests include modern Philippine social and political foreign policy, colonial empire in Southeast Asia, global illicit drug trafficking, and CIA covert operation. Alfred L. William McCoy. His nationality is American. Notable works: The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia on 1972. Achievements: on 1987, Special Citation for History. 1985, Philippine National Book Award. 1995, Philippine National Book Award again. 1987, Special Citation for History. 1998, Fulbright Heist Faculty Research Abroad. 2001, Philippine National Book Award. 2001, again, Association for Asian Studies, Grant Goodman Prize. 2004, University of Wisconsin Graduate School, JRW Smale Chair in History. 2011, Association for Asian Studies, George Cahin Prize. 2012, Yale Graduate School Alumni Association, Wilbur Cross Medal. 2012, University of Wisconsin-Madison Hilldale Award for Arts. Alejandro Reyes Roses. He was born on July 13, 1924 and he died May 23, 2011. He was a Filipino author, essayist, dramatist, and a national artist of the Philippine for literature. He served as Secretary of Education from 1962 to 1965. During the term of Philippine President Diosdado Macapagal, he attended elementary and high school at the Ateneo de Manila University before moving to the University of Arizona and then Arizona State University for his tertiary education. He graduated with a BA in Fine Arts and not long after attained his MA from the Far Eastern University back in the Philippines. He has since received honorary doctorates from Toyo University, Baguio St. Louis University, Polytechnic University of the Philippines, and Ateneo de Manila University. Roses was a captain in the Marines guerrilla during World War II and a columnist in Philippine diaries such as the Manila Chronicle and the Manila Times. He was previously president of the Manila Bulletin and of the CAP College Foundation in 2001. Rosas was appointed as chairman of the Movie and Television Review and Classification Board or MTRCB. Rosas also became a member of the Board of Trustees of GSIS or Government Service Insurance System and maintained a column in the Philippine Star called Roses and Thorns. Alejandro Roses, occupation journalist, author, essayist, dramatist, teacher, educator, raconteur, patriot, public servant. His awards Order of National Artists of the Philippines, known for recovering the stolen original manuscripts of Noli Me Tangere, El Filibusterismo, and Mi Ultimo Adios. In English, My Last Farewell. Political Caricature of the American Era by Alfred W. McCoy. American Era. Filipino artists recorded national attitudes toward the coming of the American as well as the changing mores and times. While the 377 cartoons compiled in this book speak for themselves, historian Alfred McCoy's extensive research in Philippine and American archives provides a comprehensive background not only to the cartoons but to the turbulent period as well. Artist-writer Alfredo Roses, who designed the book, contributes an essay on Philippine graphic attire of the period. Philippine cartoons political caricature of the American era, 1900s to 1941. Vince Soto, the publisher of The Independent, and never missed a chance to attack the Catholic churches. In 1906, the Philippine Supreme Court had ruled that the Roman Catholic Church was the legal owner of all disputed properties, thus stripping the nationalistic Aglipayan Church of the parish churches it had occupied right after the Revolution. During the mid-19th century from Alejandro Roses, whose descendants became publishers of the Manila Times, while Santa Cruz Church is still stands, the controversial parish house became a branch of Phil Trust, a church-owned bank. Fernando Amorsolo gives the illustration his usual racist edge, while the corrupt Filipino policeman is shown with normal features. The Chinese are caricatured as emaciated, leering creature more rodent than human. In 1917, a mysterious informant named Pedro Chua wrote the Philippine Free Press alleging that senior police were accepting bribes from Chinese gambling houses in Binondo and Quiapo district. Vicenta Soto's Independent insisted in this editorial cartoon that Chua's charges were accurate. Although the Independence cartoon depicts Harrison as a hero, his suggested reform was hardly heroic, despite the stern rhetoric which obviously appealed to the paper's penchant for a hyperbole. Harrison suggested reform was little more than a temporary palliative. 1908, the nationalist weekly El Penacimiento published an editorial field, Aves de Rapina, Birds of Prey, back the Philippine Commission Secretary of the Interior, Dean C. Norcester, for abusing his office exploit the country. Eventually, the protest reached Malacanang Palace, and for Governor Francis P. Harrison made a tentative move towards reform. In a letter to the Director General of the Civil Service, the governor denounced the rapacious demands of the landlords. He suggested passage of a bill which sets rents at 100% of assessed value of the property. The next reporter will be Junel.
Next slide. 1900s to 1941, Philippine political cartoons gained full expression during American era. Filipino artists recorded national attitude towards the coming of the Americans as well as the changing mores and times. While the 377 cartoons compiled in this book speak for themselves, historian Alfred McCoy's extensive research in Philippine and American archives provides a comprehensive background not only to the cartoon but to the turbulent period as well. In the Philippines, the presence of political cartoons has been seen as early as the publication of Kalayaan and La Solidaridad. Nepomuceno, 2012, claimed that commentaries in newspapers are valid historical instruments given that these are corroborated by official documents. Furthermore, commentaries, through the sections of the editorial pages, are useful in seeking to see the opinions and views of people on policies which are also rooted on the opinions and views of officials in government. Accounts pointed that the Philippine press has a love-hate relationship with political cartoons, as only in 1905 has there been a published book of Philippine cartoons. The Book of McCoy and Josses, 1986, was the first one to legitimize cartoons as sources of Filipinos' thoughts, and views. Although the book only covered the period of an early American through the Commonwealth, it reflected on two cartoon themes: anti-American sentiments and the condemnation of the next slide of their wait, contributions to the Philippines such as nationalism, patriotism, eye-opener, discover our roots. Next slide po. Next, this slide will be reported by Vesa Acevedo. Vesa?
Philippine cartoons. Since people's sensitivities are captured immediately through images, the popularity cartoons has risen throughout the years. Political cartoons serve as primers for engaging in the prevailing opinions of that time. One positive of fact of political cartoon is that it becomes the representation of the current conditions of our country. It lets us see the problem. Future generations will be able to have a glimpse of the past Philippine society through these cartoons. Also, it also serves as a study and reference tool for further generations. Through the use of political cartoons, people get to visualize politics and appreciate the representation which are within their worldview, clarify historical information, represent the feeling of the people, way to discuss political and social issues using art. Next po. Commission on Independence, Filipino Grievances Against Governor Wood or Petition Letter. Historical background. From the time of the American arrival in the Philippines in 1898, Filipinos persistently demanded their independence. Their colonial official could not say no because it would only derail their effort for pacification. Instead, they appointed Filipino politicians to key government positions, hoping that by doing so the Filipinos will slowly forget their desire for independence. However, the appointment of Francis Burton Harrison as Governor General and the passage of the Jones Law in 1916 or Philippine Autonomy Law changed the political landscape in the Philippines. Under the administration of President Woodrow Wilson, the Jones Law categorically expressed that America would give the Filipinos independence once a stable government is established. No specific date was given, but for Quezon and other officials, the written promise was already a significant achievement. It was back a further for the Retirement Act of 1915, when attractive financial package were offered as Americans who would to voluntarily give up their work in the Philippines. This brought about the Philippinizations of ano to, bureaucracy. Next page po. Okay, next page. Except for the Governor General, the Vice Governor, and a few more sensitive positions, all other positions were offered to Filipinos. Local politicians held cabinet positions and top-notch Filipino lawyer were appointed to the Supreme Court. There were 45 provinces that were put under Filipino governors and more than 800 municipalities under Filipino mayors. The Jones Law also created a bicameral Congress that give opportunities to politicians based in the provinces to participate in policy making. Quezon was Senate President while the House of Representative had Sergio Osmeña as Speaker. Being in key government positions, the Filipinos began to prove to the Americans that they are now competent to manage their own affairs. The Filipinos expected that it would no belong until America would consider the Filipinos as already compliant with the requirements of Jones Law and therefore must be given independence. The defeat of the Democrats in the 1920 presidential election devastated the aspirations of the Filipinos for independence. After Republican President Warren Harding took office, he sent Leonard Wood and William Cameron Forbes or Wood Forbes mission to the Philippines to observe if ever the Filipinos have already complied with the conditions of Jones Law. The missions conducted an exhaustive investigation visiting 48 provinces and 449 municipalities. However, the result of which was not favorable to the cause of Filipinos' independence. It exposed the corruption and patronage system that became prevalent in government-owned and controlled corporations during the Harrison era. It singled out particular the anomalous transaction in the administration, public lands, and the banking malpractices that resulted to the bankruptcy of the Philippines National Bank or PNB. Quezon and other members of the Nacionalista party were offended by the report because it insinuated that Filipino leaders were corrupt and incompetent and therefore do not deserve yet to be given independence. Next slide. When Leonard Wood retired from the U.S. Army in 1921, Harding appointed him as Governor General of the Philippines. After being sworn into office in October 1921, Filipino politicians welcomed him thinking he would return to US. Anyway, in a year of assume the presidency of University of Pennsylvania, unfortunately, Wood stayed and remained Governor General until his death in 1927. During his administration, he monitored closely the activities of local officials and checked their misconducts. He also vetoed numerous bills that the Philippines legislature passed and appointed American military men as officials under the executive branch or known as Kaki Cabinet. Moreover, he fortified the powers and jurisdiction to the Governor General as they were already reduced during the Harrison period. Wood's reform and their assertions of American power and government were not taken well by Quezon and the Filipino bureaucrat, ano, bureaucrats. Situations went worse as year passed as it reached its heights with the cabinet crisis of 1923. Sorry. View, 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 view. Kayo naman. Next na, Junel.
Next slide, Alea. The anti-Wood sentiment of Filipino officials exploded on July 21, 1923 with the decision of Governor General to reinstate Ray Conley, chief of the vice squad of the Manila police force who was accused of receiving money from gambling lords. The case was initiated by Mr. Almario, secretary to the mayor, who presented an alleged fake telephone conversation between Conley and some gamblers. When Manila Mayor Ramon Fernandez presented the case to Governor Wood, he advised the mayor to file the case in court. The court acquitted Conley but dissatisfied. Mayor Fernandez and Justice Secretary Jose P. Laurel requested Wood to allow them to conduct an investigation on Conley. Instead of granting their request, Wood created a board composed of other government officials. The board found Conley not guilty and recommended his reinstatement. Wood personally believed that Conley was not accountable and the charges against him were only fabrications of influential and well-connected persons who were affected by the anti-gambling campaign. After he was acquitted, Conley resigned and Wood accepted it, even though innocent of dark. Beverly Wood discovered Conley was keeping a mistress and was making false statements. Next slide. Mayor Fernandez and Secretary Laurel were insulted learning that the board created by Wood acquitted Conley. The decision implied that their case against Conley was weak. To counter their discontent, they emphasized to the people that Conley was acquitted not for his innocence but because he was an American. The two tendered their resignation, and Senate President Quezon and Speaker Manuel Rojas also resigned as members of the Council of State in support of Laurel. Governor Wood tried to win back the Filipino officials who gave up their positions. His gesture was not reciprocated, and this made him accept the resignations and replace them with their deputies. At the height of the crisis, various accusations were raised against Wood. Quezon and his allies also communicated with President Harding informing him of the reasons why they resigned en masse. They told Harding that they were also planning to send a delegation to the US to discuss Wood's blatant disregard of the rights and privileges granted to Filipinos by the previous administration. The document presented below summarizes the grievances and disgust of Filipino government officials who were affected by Wood's reforms and administrative ways. Next slide. The text, approved by the Commission on Independence on November 17, 1926, more than a quarter of century has elapsed since the Philippines came under the American flag, an emblem of freedom, not of subjugation, a symbol of altruism, not of selfishness or greed. American sovereignty was implanted in our country with the avowed purpose of training us in the art of self-government and granting us independence. Our good, not her gain, was to be Americans' aim. Our country was committed to her trust to be conserved and developed for the benefits of our people. Believing in the sincerity of America's purpose, the Filipinos applied themselves with patient diligence to the task, meeting the conditions exacted of them anxiously awaiting the day when America would honor her promise. Next slide. The first 20 years of civil government were marked by manual understanding and loyal cooperation between American and Filipinos. At the end of that period, when it seemed that the goal had finally been reached, after the President of the United States had advised the Congress that the time had come for America to fulfill her sacred pledge. Major General Leonard Wood was sent to the Philippines as Governor General, cognizant of the part taken by General Wood in the liberation of Cuna. The Filipino people expected that under his administration, the spirit of cooperation would be maintained and that the work of political emancipation would be complete. Contrary, however, to our expectations, his conduct of the government has been characterized by a train of usurpations and arbitrary acts, resulting in the curtailment of our autonomy, the destruction of our constitutional system, and the reversal of America's Philippine policy. This line of conduct recently culminated in the issuance of Executive Number 37, by which he has attempted to nullify laws creating the Board of Control and assume the functions of the body. The gravity of this last step is the more evident when we recall the series of usurpation therefore committed by him. He has refused his assent to laws which were the most wholesome and necessary for public good. He has sent at naught brought legal authority and responsibility for the Philippine heads of departments. He has substituted his constitutional advisors for a group of military attaches without legal standing in the government and not responsible to the people. He has reversed the policy of Filipinizing the service of the government by appointing Americans even when Filipinos of proven capacity were available. Next slide. He has obstructed the carrying out of national economic policies duly adopted by the legislature, merely because they are in conflict with his personal views. He has rendered merely perfunctory by the power of legislature to pass the annual appropriation law by reviving items in the law of preceding years. After voting in the corresponding items of the current Appropriation Act, in flagrant violation of the organic law, he has made appointments to position and authorized the payment of salaries. Therefore, having voted the preparations for such salaries, he has used certain public funds to grant additional compensation to public officials in clear violation of law. He has arrogated unto himself the right of exercising the powers granted by law to the emergency board after himself, the right of exercising the powers granted by law to the emergency board after abolishing said board on the ground that its powers involve an unlawful delegation of legislative authority. He has interfered in the administration of justice. He has refused to obtain the advice of the Senate in making appointments where such advice is required by the Organic Act. He has refused to submit the Senate appointment for vacancies during the recess of legislature in the contravention of the Organic Act. Next slide. He has continued in office nominees whose appointments had been rejected by the Senate. He has usurped legislative power by imposing conditions on legislative measures approved by him. He has, in the administration of affairs in Mindanao, brought about the condition which has given rise to discord and dissension between certain groups of Christian and Muslim Filipinos. He has by the policies created strained relations between resident American and Filipinos. He has endeavored on the pretext of getting the government out of business, to dispose of all the companies capitalized by the government worth many millions of people's money to powerful American interests. He has sanctioned the campaign of insidious propaganda in the United States against the Filipino people and their aspirations. He has attempted to close the Philippine National Bank, so necessary to the economic development of the country. Economic. He has adopted the practice of intervening in and controlling directly to its minute details the affairs of the Philippine government, both insular and local, in violation of self-government. Next slide. Ang liliit ah. Wait lang. He has insistently sought the American amendment of our land laws approved by the Congress of the United States, which amendment would open up the resources of our country for exploitation by predatory interests. Not content with these and the other arbitrary acts, the Governor General has recently promulgated Executive Order Number 37, declaring that the laws creating and defining the power of the Board of Control, which is authorized to vote the stock owned by the government in certain private corporations, are absolute hindi ko maintindihan. Nullities. In the same order, the Governor General also announced his purpose to exercise solely and by himself the powers and duties developing upon said board. This executive order is purported to be based on an opinion rendered by the Judge Advocate General United States Army and the confirmatory opinion of the Acting Advocate General on November 7. Despite its fact, he has found it convenient to withhold the publication of his order until November 10. A few hours after the legislature had adjourned, thus depriving of the legislature of the opportunity to consider the matter. Wait.
Okay na?
The laws
Tapos ka na?
Di pa. The laws creating and defining the power of Board of Control have been forced and acted upon by the present Governor General and other officers of the government for a number of years, and they have neither been repealed by the legislature, annulled by Congress, not nor declared unconstitutional by the courts. To hold that Governor General by a mere executive order can set them aside is to subvert the whole system of constitutional government and destroy the theory of separation of powers which the Governor General has always been so intent in upholding. Last slide. In the face ano, in the face of this critical situation, we, the constitutional representatives of the Filipinos people, met the deliberate upon the present difficulties existing in the government of the Philippine Island, and determine how the consciousness of our sacred and inescapable duty to our country and our sense of loyalty